Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharne Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Shatarne Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadha Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Vanchikapatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhya evacha. Paritanam pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Maharaj ki jai. आपकी तबीयत कैसी है? आपकी तबीयत ठीक है? Okay. Okay. All right. Yes, so devotees, thank you again for participating. We're just really happy to have you here with us. Last night, we concluded by going through verse 20, which is a very important verse in terms of giving definitions of the soul. So we're going to move on from there. Excuse me. Let's just have a look here for a moment. Yes, so where we are in the section of Bhagavad Gita from, well, it's a subsection actually, like a subdivision of one of the main sections. And this is from verse 16 to verse 25, and the subject matter is, death is just a matter of the soul changing bodies. So it's not such a big thing. As Arjuna was saying so much, it's such a big thing. But Krishna's teaching in these verses from 16 to 25 is not such a big thing. In fact, it's inevitable sooner or later. So it's not really that we need to make some huge fuss about it. Okay, so like we said, we concluded on verse 20. And I think just to remind us and bring us up to speed a little, I'll just read the verse itself again, and then we'll move on from there. So this is now Bhagavad Gita chapter 2, verse 20. For the soul there's neither birth nor death at any time. He has not come into being, does not come into being, and will not come into being. He is unborn, eternal, ever existing, and primeval. He is not slain when the body is slain. And just one point I could just mention, it's an interesting consideration which sometimes people don't really think about, that when we say that someone is eternal, like we are eternal, Krishna's eternal and we are eternal, it doesn't simply mean deathless, that we're not going to die. Of course, it includes that. We're not going to die. But it also includes that we are unborn. We were never born. It's not that you become born and then you become eternal because then you don't die somehow or other after that. No, that's not there. Okay, so I thought I'd just mention that point, by the way, because the verse said that the soul is unborn, eternal, unborn, eternal, ever existing and primeval. Primeval means, like we mentioned last night, very ancient. The actual Sanskrit word which Srila Prabhupada has translated as primeval is Purana. You know, we've got the literatures, the Puranas, the Vedic literatures, and Srimad Bhagavatam is one of the Puranas. Purana means ancient, even sort of beyond ancient. It's basically timeless. You cannot really affix times, at least you can't easily. And definitely some of it is just there's no way of having any idea of the time when some of the things happened. And, you know, I can speak a tiny bit of Hindi, and one day, and in Hindi, the word Purana is there, meaning exactly the same thing. So one day I addressed, you could say, an old friend of mine, Brijbasi. And I told him, Aap mera Purani Bandhu hai. Puran Bandhu. Anyway, Aap mera Puran Bandhu hai. I thought I was saying, you're my old friend. But actually what I was saying was, you are my ancient, ancient friend. Just, you know. And he looked at me, he was a little taken aback. All right. So we go on now to verse 21. Chapter 2, verse 21. And the basic idea is that in these verses, as we go on for a number of verses, most of this evening, if not all, but at least a good part of this evening, these are all going to be verses which are talking about the nature of the soul, and even in a number of cases in fairly similar ways, actually. Yeah. So, okay, so here we go now, number 21. O Partha, it's Arjuna, how can a person who knows that the soul is indestructible, eternal, unborn, and immutable, kill anyone or cause anyone to kill? Well, again, it's sort of, at least partially, the same point, a little bit of a, you know, sort of perspective on it. How can anyone kill or cause anyone to kill? Knowing that the soul is eternal, indestructible, which we've already heard a few times so far, and we're going to hear a few more times. So, according to Srila, a little sort of side point here, according to Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, at this point here, Arjuna kind of interjects. He raises a point. Hang on a minute. You know, I want to just, can I ask something, please? Can I say something? And Krishna says, sure. And so according to Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, Arjuna says, all right, the soul is eternal, but I don't want to be the cause of these souls changing bodies. It's a little tricky little angle on things. So yeah, they're eternal, they just change bodies, it doesn't really affect them. but still I don't want to be the cause of them changing bodies. To which Lord Krishna replies that you are not going to be able to stop them changing bodies by not fighting. So it's just, countering the arguments. So, and like we said, these points we've pretty much encountered directly or indirectly already, and we're going to encounter them further. There is an interesting point which, has not been mentioned actually. If you look in the purport, you'll see it's the third sentence. In other words, just pretty much at the beginning. Although the justice of the peace, or you could say judge in a court, awards capital punishment to a person condemned for murder, the justice of the peace cannot be blamed because he orders violence to another person according to the codes of justice. So he can't be blamed. He will get no reactions for condemning someone. You be killed, and then the person, on his order, that person is killed, but there's no reaction. There's no reaction because he's upholding the law. And even Prabhupada goes so far as to say that just immediately after, in Manusamhita, the law book for mankind, it is supported that a murderer should be condemned to death, so that in his next life he will not have to suffer for the great sin he has committed. Therefore, the king's punishment of hanging a murderer is actually beneficial. Similarly, when Krishna orders fighting, it must be concluded that violence is for supreme justice. Krishna has the right and the duty, actually. And thus Arjuna should follow the instruction. Knowing well that there's nothing wrong with it. Okay. Before we go on to the next verse, we have here a special question for those of you doing Bhakti Shastri, so please note this. It's related to this verse 21, and it is from a class on Srimad Bhagavatam, 1st Canto, Chapter 2, verse 5. Make a note of that. Okay, devotees doing Bhakti Shastri. Srimad Bhagavatam 1, 2, 5, a lecture given on, note this too, because you've got to find which lecture, April the 3rd, 1972, in Sydney. We have a couple of devotees, I think, from Sydney taking our seminar here. Okay, April 3rd, 1972. Well, you know what? That's an interesting point for me. It's about 10 days before I saw Srila Prabhupada for the first time, saw any devotees. Prabhupada was the first devotee. This was in Sydney, then Prabhupada came over to New Zealand. All right, anyway. So, there's a section here, let me just read it. So, soul is eternal, the body is not permanent, temporary, and there are 8,400,000 of different types of bodies. We're migrating or transmigrating from one to another. This business, if we want to stop, because we're eternal, our aims and objects should be to attain that eternal status. That we can attain by Krishna consciousness. This is the movement. We're giving information to everyone that If you want your eternal life, blissful life, life of knowledge, then you take to this movement, Krishna consciousness, and you'll have it. Okay, so now there's a question on that, what we just read right now. So let's see. What's the question? What do you need to do if you want to stop transmigrating and if you want eternal blissful life? Okay, well, we just said, what do you have to do? You have to take to this movement of Krishna consciousness. Note it down. Don't tell the examiners that I told you the answer, all right? We will accept bribes. All right, so verse number 22. And again, this is another classic verse. It's just, there's so many classic verses right around here. This is a classic verse about reincarnation, how it works. As a person puts on new garments, giving up old ones, the soul similarly accepts new material bodies, giving up the old and useless ones. So, in other words, our bodies are being compared to cloth. There's old clothes, old clothes, new clothes. Old clothes, you know, at least when they reach a certain point, you kind of got to just dispose of them. They fall to pieces after you've stitched them up so many times. Oh, Krishna. So like this, as the body gets old, it reaches that point, and then it falls away, and you get a new one, a nice, new, strong one, like that. That's the idea. So now here in the purport, in the second paragraph, I can just mention, actually basically the entire second paragraph, the majority even of the whole purport is devoted to discussing a particular example from, well, you see there's in the middle of the second paragraph, there's a verse quoted from Mundaka Upanishad and Shweta Upanishad, same verse. And the idea is that the soul and the supersoul are compared to the soul to one bird and the supersoul to another bird, and both birds are sitting in a tree which is compared to the body. And the one bird, the soul, is absorbed in the tree, the fruit, what's available, how is the tree making the most, how we can enjoy the tree, particularly the fruit. That's the soul, that's us, in our bodies. But the super soul is just witnessing. He's not trying to exploit the body or use the body practically for very much. So this example is given, and let's just read the translation of these two verses at the bottom of that paragraph. Although the two birds are in the same tree, the eating bird is fully engrossed with anxiety and moroseness as the enjoyer of the fruits of the tree. But if in some way or other he turns his face to his friend, who is the Lord, and knows his glories, at once the suffering bird becomes free from all anxieties. Okay, so the one bird, the first bird, the soul, that's us, trying to enjoy in the tree, but many anxieties and concerns. Sometimes the fruit is not ripe. Sometimes it's overripe. Sometime some other birds come and steal the fruit or whatever. So that bird is really worked up and disturbed. But the supersoul, the witnessing bird, is unaffected. Yes, so then back to sort of the same point that we encountered in the previous verse, in the last purport. Krishna advises Arjuna that these people, if they're killed, he would rather be happy to kill their bodies in the righteous fight so they can be cleansed of all reactions. By them, if he kills them in the battle, he will help them by freeing them from reactions which otherwise, who knows when they would get. But they'll all just be removed just like that if they're killed in the battle. So just to read the last sentence in the purport, one who lays down his life on the sacrificial altar or in the proper battlefield is at once cleansed of bodily reactions and promoted to a higher status of life. So there was no cause for Arjuna's lamentation. Okay. So let's go on then to 23. And it's another very important verse. It's a really good one. It's a really good one. The soul can never be cut to pieces by any weapon, nor burned by fire, nor moistened by water, nor withered by the wind. And none of these things can harm the soul, or can even really, you could say, touch the soul, influence the soul at all. It's not just the soul is very tolerant, so, you can smash the soul, but the soul will tolerate and put up with it. It's all just sort of meaningless to the soul. Of course, in material life, because we're attached to these bodies, we are, like we mentioned last night, our consciousness is spread all over our bodies. And last night I took my hand and I sort of, very lightly tapped my hand, and I can feel it. I can feel it. So when you're attached to the body, you feel what's going on to the body. And because you're attached to it, you are influenced. If it's a nice feeling, you feel good. A little. If it's a bad feeling, somehow, you get struck or something like that. Because you're attached to the body, you feel the pain. But otherwise, the soul is not affected by these things. And actually now the same point is made in a slightly different way, but it's just extending the same point in verse 25. So let's read verse 25. It is said that the soul is invisible, inconceivable, and immutable. Knowing this, you should not grieve for the body. Incidentally, immutable means unchangeable. No mutation, no changing. So we're not going to go into detail here. There are purports, of course. But it's basically just reiterating what we've read. And our acharyas say there is some repetition here to remove doubts. Normally, repetition is considered a fault, but here there's repetition. We've seen the same or extremely similar things said in like 4, 5, 6 verses or something like that. Just the same thing from different points of view. But it's not a fault of just repetitiveness and just, sort of, beating an empty husk of rice or grain. The point is so important that it's being repeated to remove doubts. So now we go on verse 26. The point here, it's another subsection from 26 to 30. That is that the soul cannot be killed and the body cannot be saved. So therefore fight. Yeah, in other words, what you are hoping for cannot be achieved. So fight. And here there's an interesting variation in argument on the part of Lord Krishna here. That is that since whatever it was, verse 12, 13, say verse 13, Lord Krishna has been explaining all these things on the basis of the eternality of the soul and the temporary nature of the body, but it's particularly the eternal nature of the soul. Now he's going to say that at least to some degree, between 26 and 30, he's going to say that, all right, even if you think there is no soul, even if you think there is no soul, that we are simply our bodies, and that's what we are, still you should fight. Still you should fight. So, okay, let's go into these verses then. So verse 26, if, however, you think that the soul, Prabhupada then says in brackets, or the symptoms of life, is always born and dies forever, you still have no reason to lament, O mighty armed. Srila Prabhupada in the purport makes reference to Buddhists. Where are we? 26, yeah. So, Prabhupada says, there's always a class of philosophers almost akin to the Buddhists who do not believe in the separate existence of the soul beyond the body. Shri Shri Radha Radhanath Shri Giri Govardhan Shri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu Ki Jai. Yeah. So they're different. In Vedic history, you get many types of people with many types of ideas. Oh, yeah. So there is this class. They're not Buddhists, but they have very similar ideas. So as Lord Krishna says here, you may think, or if you think that life is born when the body is born, and life is finished when the body is finished, still you have no reason to lament. Yes. And Prabhupada makes the point, this is somewhat similar, it's similar to the idea of the modern scientists, that the body, this is in the first paragraph, the body is a combination of physical elements, and at a certain stage the life symptoms develop by the interaction of those elements, and then later on, whatever happens, but it all breaks down, and and the body, which was living due to the combination of chemicals or whatever material ingredients, it stops living. So there you go. And so even if you think like that life is material, in other words, we are simply bunches of chemicals. If we're our bodies can be analyzed completely in chemical terms. We're just bunches of chemicals. And no one is going to lament if some chemicals just get lost. So there's nothing to lament about death. Yeah. So then he goes on, 27. One who has taken his birth is sure to die, and after death one is sure to take birth again. Therefore, in the unavoidable discharge of your duty, you should not lament. So now, in this verse 27, now he has gone back to the idea that there is a soul. 26 is like, there's no soul. Life just appears at birth, and life goes and just disappears at the time of death. But now he's saying that, all right, still if you accept there is a soul, then once you're born, you're sure to die. And once you die, you're sure to be born. And once you're born again, you're sure to die again. And once you die again, you're sure to be born again. And it's just like this endless thing. And so what is the big deal about dying? So Prabhupada says at the end, I think it's at the end of the purport of 27, yes, by avoiding the discharge of his proper duty, he would not be able to stop the death of his relatives, and he would be degraded from his position as a Kshatriya. He would be degraded due to his selection of the wrong path of action. Then verse 28, this is now again switching back to the perspective of those who think there is no soul. They don't accept the soul. 28. All created beings are unmanifest in their beginning, manifest in their interim state, and unmanifest again when annihilated. So what need is there for lamentation? So basically it's repeating the point of 26. Hope we're not getting sort of confused between the different verses. Yeah. So, obviously the main point is whether you accept the soul or not, there's no cause for lamentation for the birth or death of a living entity. So in the purport, Srila Prabhupada, in the first paragraph, Srila Prabhupada goes through a whole discussion about the process of material creation. That first of all, there are material elements. First of all, they're unmanifest. Then they become manifest as specific elements, earth, water, fire, etc. And then things are made from those elements. Prabhupada gives the example here from earth, the element earth, big skyscrapers are made. But then after some time, all these things which are made from the combinations of the material elements, after some time they all collapse, become unmanifest, and the elements themselves go back into their raw state. Yes. So what's the big deal? Whatever state they're in this sort of cyclical type of process, and whether you kill or you don't kill is not going to stop the cycle from going on. The energy, conservation of energy, maybe you've heard about that. Energy can be transformed, but it's always conserved. You can't put energy out of existence. You can only make it take another shape or function in a different way. All right. So let us go on to verse 29. This is a special verse. We call this, devotees call this the amazing verse. It's the amazing verse, 29. Some look on the soul as amazing. Some describe him as amazing. And some hear of him as amazing. While others, even after hearing about him, cannot understand him at all. So, Krishna. And they're sort of, some devotees, when they present this verse, they say that some look on the soul as amazing, and that's amazing. Yes. Some describe him as amazing, and that's amazing. That some can describe him at all, because he's so amazing. In other words, you get the idea, I think. So, Baladev Vijabhushan comments in the form of Arjuna questioning Krishna. Arjuna says, though I've been taught many things by you who are omniscient, I do not understand the nature of the Atma, which will drive away lamentation. Why is this? Why don't I understand the soul? Why is it? And this is Krishna's answer, that because he's so amazing, the soul is just so amazing. Yes. And it's amazing, Prabhupada makes the point, it's amazing that this is so important. That's amazing. There's so much amazement surrounding this verse. And it's amazing, as Prabhupada says, in the second paragraph, which begins, second paragraph, let's say, begins some people. So some people who are inclined to hear about the soul may be attending lectures in good association, but sometimes owing to ignorance, they are misguided by acceptance of the supersoul and the atomic soul as one without distinction of magnitude. It is very difficult to find a man who perfectly understands the position of the supersoul, the atomic soul, their respective functions and relationships, and all other major and minor details. Yes. Okay. So now, finally, we go on to the last verse in this second section, the whole second section, which has been discussing the soul, Jnana Yoga, as knowledge of the soul distinct from the body, particularly like that. And I'll read the verse, and I'm going to read the whole purport actually. O descendant of Bharata, he who dwells in the body can never be slain. Therefore you need not grieve for any living being. Yes, and like I said, I'll read the purport. The Lord now concludes the chapter of instruction on the immutable spirit soul. In describing the immortal soul in various ways, Lord Krishna establishes that the soul is immortal and the body is temporary. Therefore, Arjuna, as a Kshatriya, should not abandon his duty out of fear that his grandfather and teacher, Bhishma and Drona, will die in the battle. On the authority of Sri Krishna, one has to believe that there is a soul different from the material body, not that there is no such thing as soul, or that living symptoms develop at a certain stage of material maturity, resulting from the interaction of chemicals. Though the soul is immortal, violence is not encouraged, but at the time of war, it is not discouraged when there is actual need for it. That need must be justified in terms of the sanction of the Lord and not capriciously. Let me admit something to you, devotees. I spent, maybe 10 minutes today. Well, I don't know if you're aware, but today is the actual anniversary of the day the Americans dropped the first atomic bomb on Japan, on Hiroshima. Today. And I was just glancing through, and there was one, the different things were being discussed, and one thing that was being discussed was it right or wrong for the Americans to do that? And the American answer is, it was right because it saved, if they'd had to invade Japan and, by the normal route, so many people would have died, much more than did. But then there are others who say that, well, those people who died, they were not fighting. They're just walking down the street, living their lives, and suddenly, bang. Anyway, so I'm just bringing this point up in order to say Hare Krishna and good luck to figure these things out on the material platform and come up with the right answer. But as Prabhupada says here, the need at the time of war, it is not discouraged to be violent when there's an actual need for it. But that need must be justified in terms of the sanction of the Lord and not capriciously. All right, so now, devotees, we go on to a completely different, quite a different section from verse 31 to 37. Let's see if we can get through the whole thing. 31 to 37, the subject is karma kandya. And the idea is that you are a Kshatriya. Therefore, you must fight. Because that's what karma kandya, that's what varnashram says. Karma kandya varnashram. That's what it says. And so you have to do it. And stop procrastinating. Just stand up and just get out there and do it. That's the idea. So, now if you remember, we told you one of the days, that in this section, Arjuna's second argument that I will not enjoy, we will not enjoy if we fight, Krishna is defeating that argument here. That if you fight, you won't enjoy, there'll be so much suffering and pain, and that's all there's going to be. So let's get into it then. Verse 31. Considering your specific duty as a Kshatriya, you should know that there's no better engagement for you than fighting on religious principles. And so there's no need for hesitation. You don't even need to think about it. So in the purport, well, Prabhupada discusses different points pretty much about Kshatriyas. It's verse 31. Different points about Kshatriyas. Shat means to hurt. Triya comes from trayate, means to protect. So Kshatriya means a person who protects people from being hurt, the common people. And Kshatriyas are trained for killing. Prabhupada describes here in the purport how they would have to fight face to face with a tiger with a sword as part of their training, Kshatriyas. Yeah. And it was the whole thing was considered sacred. It was considered sacred. It wasn't just prove you're a tough guy. Prabhupada says when the tiger was killed, it would be offered the royal order of cremation. And at least at the time Prabhupada wrote this, Prabhupada says the kings in Jaipur were still doing that. I don't know if they still are, but I don't know. So, yeah. And Kshatriyas never take sannyas. Prabhupada makes that point. They may take vanapras, but they don't take sannyas. And as Prabhupada explains, he quotes a couple of verses there. From, is it Manu Samhita, from where? From somewhere. In the law books, in the religious law books, it points out that while fighting another king envious of him, a Kshatriya is eligible for achieving the heavenly planets. Yes. So anyway, so this is the basic idea. So Srila Prabhupada explains elsewhere. Krishna says to Arjuna, there are many things beyond the bodily concept of life. But if you're still thinking that you're in the bodily concept of life, then as a Kshatriya, it is your duty to fight. Prabhupada says, Krishna is putting Arjuna in a dilemma. This way or that way you have to fight. If you think that you're not in the bodily concept of life, then it's my order, you must fight. If you think that you're in the bodily concept of life, then you're a Kshatriya and you must fight. Either way you have to fight. This is Krishna's conclusion. So verse 32, O Partha, happy are the Kshatriyas to whom such fighting opportunities come unsought, opening for them the doors of the heavenly planets. Krishna says directly, those Kshatriyas who get these opportunities to fight without looking for them, they're happy because it opens the doors to the heavenly planets. So Arjuna said that I won't enjoy, I'll go to hell and I'll suffer. But Krishna is saying, no, you'll go to the heavenly planets. You're going to really enjoy. Yes. If he should conquer his enemies, he would enjoy the kingdom. And if he should die in the battle, he would be elevated to the heavenly planets, whose doors were wide open to him. Fighting would be for his benefit in either case. That's the purport, in the purport of 32. 33. If, however, you do not perform your religious duty of fighting, then you'll certainly incur sins for neglecting your duties and thus lose your reputation as a fighter. So he'll lose his reputation. And for a Kshatriya's, reputation is a very important thing. I mean, there's big enjoyment. I am a Kshatriya. But if you become some, sissy Kshatriya, and people will laugh at you, look at this Kshatriya, he's just a clown. And that's very hard for the Kshatriyas. So by not fighting, he will incur sin and suffer in the hellish planets. He's going to lose his enjoyment. We have another special question here based on, what's it based on? 233, yeah. 233. And it is, note this down, devotees, it's a class on Bhagavad Gita chapter 7, verses 4 and 5, given on March the 30th, 1971 in Bombay. I hope you wrote that down. Bhagavad Gita chapter 7, verses 4 and 5, March the 30th, 1971, Bombay. And Prabhupada says, this fighting was taught by Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Krishnavanam Tusha Krishnam Sangha Pangastra Parshadam. Sangha Upanga Astra. Astra means weapons. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu fought with Maya, not with machine gun, but with his most confidential associates. Yes. His associates were his weapons. His fighting weapons were Sri Advaita Prabhu, Sri Nityananda Prabhu, Sri Vasudhi Gaura Bhaktavrinda, and other many devotees. So Lord Chaitanya's movement is also fighting, but it is a fight in a different way. You want to learn about that? You want to learn about that? You must go out and distribute books all day, every day, for some years, and then you'll understand. You'll understand. So, okay, so now the question that you're going to be asked is, who did Lord Chaitanya fight with, and what was the ammunition? That's not very well put. Well, okay, ammunition. What were the weapons that he used? Who did Lord Chaitanya fight with? He fought with Maya. And his ammunition or weapons were his associates, most confidential associates. So now we are going to just read through the next 4 verses to the end of this section, because they are stressing the same thing. People, this is now 34, people will always speak of your infamy, and for a respectable person, dishonor is worse than death, particularly for a Kshatriya. The great generals who have highly esteemed your name and fame will think that you have left the battlefield out of fear only, and thus they'll consider you insignificant. Your enemies will describe you in many unkind words and scorn your ability. What could be more painful for you? And the last verse in the section, O son of Kunti, Either you'll be killed on the battlefield and attain the heavenly planets, or you will conquer and enjoy the earthly kingdom. Therefore, get up with determination and fight. That's the end of that section. So Arjuna had been saying, if I win, I will lose, because there'll be so much sinful reaction. People who are dear to me will have gone. I won't get their association. So if I win, I lose. And if I lose, I lose, because I'll be dead. But Krishna is saying that if you win, you'll win. And if you lose, you'll win. It's a win-win. It's a win-win-win. It's just an all-round win. So stop procrastinating. So it's brilliant logic on Krishna's part. It's interesting, but I'm sure the curtain's going to open. I just want to read one thing from a class that Prabhupada gave on these verses. It's a little unusual, but it's very nice. You have to just listen carefully to follow. So Arjuna's position is very precarious. There is a Bengali proverb. There was a famous dancing girl. Now, those ladies have a veil called guntana in Indian language. So when this dancing girl was on the stage, she noticed that many of her relatives were in the audience. So she began to draw her veil. She felt embarrassed. So she started, somehow trying to hide herself with her veil because of the relatives. But Prabhupada continues, this is not correct for a dancing girl. She is there to dance. She should not appear to be shy and must freely dance according to her duty. By the Swadharma principle, it is a Kshatriya's duty to fight and to kill in the fight. If you are fighting and become sympathetic, then it's like the dancing girl who, when on the stage, appears to be shy. Why should she be shy? She should dance freely, and that will be to her credit. So on the battlefield, you cannot be compassionate. That is not required. Hare Krishna. So we'll carry on tomorrow, right? It's Thursday. Yeah, we'll carry on tomorrow from verse 38. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai.